Was that the bite of
21?
Last year I reviewed Rosario Vampire, which is a series where fans love its manga but don't really like its anime. Its first season was mostly faithful to its manga, but after that season 2 came and was like, fuck it, I'ma do my own thing. Literally nothing in season 2 was canon. Everything was made up and written just for the anime. A decent amount of fans don't like the anime because it's different, has a ton of fan service, and mainly just worse than the manga. I get why some people don't like the anime, but I also think it's good on its own. Just because it's different and also weaker than its manga doesn't mean it's bad. I love both Vampire's anime and manga, and I like them both for two completely different reasons. The manga is a genuinely well-written shonen battle series, while the anime is a dumb, fun fan service harem. Now, I admitted in my review that the anime was and still is a guilty pleasure of mine. I enjoy it a lot more than I probably should, but that's alright. At the very least though, I think Vampire's anime is okay. The anime is its own thing and should be treated as such. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, there's another Vampire series where fans like its manga but don't really like its anime. If you couldn't tell by the title of the video, that of course is Karin. Karin was a manga series that came out in 2003 and got a 24-episode anime adaptation in 2005. Similar to Vampire, Karin's manga was a tonally darker series where its anime was much different and way more lighthearted. Because of this, a lot of manga fans didn't care for the anime, and even non-manga fans disliked it for other reasons. The biggest complaint a lot of people had was the addition of a brand new character named Winner who wasn't even in the manga. I'll get this out of the way now. I don't dislike Winner. In fact, I actually really like him, but I'll talk about why later on. Just like with Vampire, I have no issue with Karin's anime being different from its manga. I enjoy both the anime and the manga. They're both good for different reasons. However, unlike Vampire, I'd say Karin's anime is genuinely great and not just a big guilty pleasure. Hell, I'm gonna get this out of the way too. I like the anime more than the manga.
You what?
You heard me right. I think Karin's anime is better than its manga. The manga is pretty good, but the anime is notably better, or at least from what I remember. I watched the anime in 2014, rewatched it a year later, and then picked up a bootleg DVD for about $20. Now, why did I get a bootleg instead of the official release? Well, that's because the official DVD sells for about, $300.
$300? That's outrageous.
I love the anime, it's in my top 20 favorites, but still, I am not buying it for over $300. So because of that, I got a bootleg DVD, and guess what? It fucking sucks. For whatever reason, the video quality is complete dog shit. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm gonna guess that it's 360 or maybe even 240p, which is not very epic. I have no idea why the quality is so shitty. There's only 8 episodes on each disc. That's about the maximum amount of space for DVDs to store without lowering the quality of them. Out of all the DVDs I own, only 3 of them are bootlegs. One of those is obviously Karin, and the other 2 being Trigun and Toradora. The Trigun bootleg I was given to for free, and it looks alright, so I can't really complain. There's 3 discs, and each of them have either 8 or 9 episodes on them. The video quality isn't perfect, but it's still watchable. The only problem I had was that one of the episodes on the last disc just didn't work, but that was it. The official DVD is only about $20, so maybe I'll pick it up one day. Then there's a Toradora bootleg, which only has 2 discs, meaning they each have 13 episodes on them. And here's the funny part. It looks completely fine. Despite having 5 hours of video on each disc, they look good and also a lot better than the Trigun discs. I cannot understand how or why this is, but I'm not complaining. The reason I don't have the official DVD or Blu-ray is because it's expensive. The lowest I've been able to find the Blu-ray for is about $80, and that's a lot even for one of my favorite anime. I also don't have much of a reason to get the official release since, like I said, the bootleg looks completely completely fine. But anyway, yeah, these bootlegs look fine, but the Karin one looks fucking terrible. The craziest thing about this is that I actually watched the entirety of the series like this on my third watch. I'm very stubborn and I wanted to get my money's worth on this shitty bootleg. Don't ask me how I did it. I was retarded and still am. But because I don't want to watch the series in such poor quality, I just said fuck it, might as well watch it online. And that's what I did this time. And that finally brings me to the start of the video. So the first episode begins with a flashback of the main character Karin biting some random Jew at a lake back when she was a kid. It goes on for 2 minutes and then cuts to Karin sleeping in her bed. Honestly, I don't like this opening flashback scene. First off, it gives the impression that the series is going to be somewhat dark and grim, even though it isn't. The series has its serious moments here and there, but it's mainly a lighthearted comedy. Also, the kid Karin bites is Winner, who doesn't appear until episode 7. Winner also isn't even the main love interest, so this scene is just kinda here to show that Karin is a vampire. However, the first half of this episode tries to avoid the fact that Karin is a vampire, so this is very contradictory. It's not a huge problem, and it doesn't bother me too much. So anyway, Karin is a vampire, yet she's still able to attend school in broad daylight. At school, she gets to see her gamer best friend Maki, and also the new scary transfer student Kenta Usui.
I have special eyes.
So after school, Karin gets horny and bites some dumb Democrat in the park. Her sister Anju comes, erases his memory, and then they both go home. However, it turns out that Usui was watching them the whole time, but thinks Karin just kissed him, so everything is a-okay, I guess. The next day, Karin meets Usui at school, she feels weird, and then... So Karin sharded out a bunch of blood from her nostrils because she's an unvampire. She's a vampire who doesn't suck blood, but instead is one whose blood increases and gushes out of her nose. It's bizarre, it's unique, and most importantly, it's a fun and silly concept. And that's kinda why I think the anime works better, because it doesn't take itself very seriously. This is a series about a clumsy, cheerful, unvampire girl who gets nosebleeds all the time. Everyone is scared of Usui because his eyes are creepy, which is something he can't help at all. Anju has a talking doll, her brother Ren is a playboy, and her father is sort of a wimp. It's a silly show filled with silly ideas, and the anime understands that. However, it's not just a dumb comedy. There are some interesting and genuine good ideas thrown in here. For example, in episode 2, we find out that the reason Karin's blood increases whenever she's around Usui is because of her blood's affinity. Apparently, vampires are attracted to certain traits in humans and find those to be their favorite type of blood. Karin's type is unhappiness, Ren's is stress, her grandmother's is love, her father's is pride, and her mother's is dishonesty. It's a simple idea that helps us to understand who some of these characters are. I think one of the best examples to look at would be Anju. Throughout her entire life, Anju has always been fond of Karin because she's a great person and a great sister. She spent a bunch of time with Karin, and that's because she doesn't leave the house too often, or at least when she does, she just wanders around and does her own thing.
Denied.
She doesn't really talk with anyone else and doesn't have any friends either. So not only is Karin her sister, but also her best friend too. Once the series starts, Karin slowly falls in love with Usui, and because of that, she starts to spend more time with him and less with Anju. Because of this, she starts to feel lonely and a bit angry since she doesn't get to see Karin as often. Due to this, Anju hits puberty and discovers that her blood's affinity is jealousy, which is very fitting for her. Then there's Ren, who as mentioned enjoys the blood of people, or more specifically women who were stressed. I'd say this fits Ren rather well too, since he's kind of an asshole playboy who also constantly shits on Karin for not being a normal vampire. However, despite a lot of his actions, he isn't a total shithead. Deep down, he does care for Karin, his family, and also the many women he bites too. He explains how sucking blood from humans can be a good thing since it can get rid of the negative traits they have. When he sucks the blood out of a stressed woman, they become more more cheerful, confident, and energetic, which is inherently a good thing. Stress itself isn't entirely a bad thing, and Ren isn't entirely a bad person. While stress is mostly seen as a bad trait to have, it can be good at times. It helps protect us from dangerous things and can also make us act responsibly too. Just like stress, Ren can be a douchebag at times, but he can also be a considerate and caring person too.
You are a fucking piece of shit!
Alright, I just talked about some things that work in the series, so now let's talk about some dumb stuff that I don't really understand since they were never explained. So Karin is basically a normal girl who attends school, has a job, and has Maki as her best friend. She's been friends with her ever since they were little, so they've been together for a long time. Now during that time, Maki and Karin have hung out with each other after school, but never once has Maki ever gone or even asked to go to Karin's house. Well, there's a reason for that, which is due to her father mind controlling Maki as well as Karin's other friends to prevent them from thinking to ask to come over. Not only that, but why hasn't anyone ever found Karin's house before? Well, that's because the family has a barrier set up around their house which forces people to turn around and walk in a different direction. Or at least I think that's how it works. I don't fully get it, but at least there's a reason why no one has ever discovered where they live. The series does manage to give explanations to some things that may not be clear, but it doesn't do so for everything. For example, I don't believe they ever explained why Anju stopped going to school or if she stopped going at all. In episode 18, their father explains that all of them would attend school until their vampire powers awaken. Karin goes to school since she's an unvampire, Ren used to go to school until his powers awakened, and I'm assuming Anju did as well. I believe she's wearing a school uniform here, but I could be wrong. Her vampire powers don't awaken until episode 20, so she should have been going to school before this since she can handle being outside in the sun with an umbrella. In the manga, it confirms that Anju does attend school, but only on cloudy or rainy days. But that's the manga, and as mentioned, the manga is completely different, so this might not be the same in the anime. Another thing I don't really get is why Karin never knew about vampires having blood affinity. Honestly, I never thought of this until now, but it's actually a notable flaw. She's 16 and you're telling me that her parents never told her about this before? I find that extremely difficult to believe, and I'm guessing this was just a big oversight from the author. It's only like this because Ren has to explain to the audience how blood affinity works. I can get by that being a reason, but it didn't need to be this way. It would have been better and made more sense for Karin to have known this and just explained it to us during the first or second episode. Although this is a significant issue, like some other problems I have, it doesn't ruin the series by any means. Even this next plot hole I found is kinda big, but despite that, I'm still able to ignore it somewhat. So whenever Karin bites someone, she injects her blood into them, which then overrides all the negative and unhappiness that's inside them. This results in them becoming much more cheerful and happy, but only for a short amount of time. In episode 2, she bites Usui's mother, who's very unhappy since she just lost her job after being sexually harassed at work. After she was bitten, she became energetic and confident, but only for about a few weeks or so. After enough time passed, her bite marks went away and she turned back to normal. Seems fine, right? Well, on its own it is, but the series isn't consistent with how this works. In episode 18, we see that the faggot Ren bit still has bite marks, even though it's been at least 5 years since then. Going by this, we can assume that both vampire bite marks and their effects on a person are permanent. That's fine too, but this also creates some big problems. If these effects are permanent, then how is it that no one seems to notice that a bunch of people have bite marks on them? I'm also going to assume that Ren and his parents need to bite at least one person a day in order to fulfill their blood's affinity, although the series doesn't outright tell us this. If this is true, then that means 21 people would have to be bitten a week, which is kinda ridiculous, especially since their marks don't go away. This would mean that after a full year, there would be over 1,000 people in Japan that have bite marks on them. Even if I'm wrong and vampires only need to feed every week or so, that's still a large amount of bitten people walking around one area. Also, that amount only increases as the days go on. Now, is this a silly thing to criticize? Yes. but also no. This is another thing that I never noticed until recently, but it also makes me realize how flawed Karen's world is. This shouldn't make sense, and that's mainly due to the series not going into detail on how this concept works. Now, the reason I just explained or assumed how this works is because it's different from how Karen's blood injecting works. Fighting and injecting are two different things, so I'm completely fine with Karen's injecting having different effects from everyone else's. My problem with Karen's injection is that the effects of it aren't consistent. When she bit Usui's mother, the effects lasted for a limited amount of time. However, back when she was a kid and bit Winter, the effects appeared to have been permanent for whatever reason. Just like with Usui's mother, Winter was depressed and miserable since he sucked as a vampire hunter, which resulted in his grandfather not caring for him. After running away from his family, Karen bit him, and then he got the motivation he needed to become a vampire hunter, and he continued to keep that motivation until the present day. The only reasonable explanation I can come up with is that because Winter was cheerful, motivated, and improving, he didn't become unhappy again. With Usui's mother, she failed to get a new job for weeks, which eventually led her to become miserable again. So I guess the effects on people are only temporary until they gain back the traits that were sucked out or injected into them. That's all I got, but this is just an estimated guess. The problem is that the series doesn't explain this, and it's kinda bothering me the more I think about it. I have some small nitpicks with the series because of course I do, but I'm not going to go into much detail. One of them is the fact that Karen is 16, yet there's only been one time where she was rushed to the hospital. You're telling me that she's only been sick once at school over the past 10 years. Also, she goes to the nurse's office, so wouldn't the nurse be able to somehow find out that she isn't human too? Like I said, it's a dumb nitpick that doesn't really bother me at all. Besides my issues and nitpicks, there's also some more questions I have that aren't answered. If the Sinclairs are still hunting vampires in the 20th century, then does that mean there are more vampire hunters out there? I would say probably not, just because the Sinclairs only continue to hunt to restore their family's reputation. Also, this brings up a more important question I have. Are there other vampires still living today besides the Maka family? I think that's most definitely a yes, but the better question I have is how many vampires are there currently? Are there 100, 100,000, or even a million? Also, are there other vampires close to where Karen lives? These questions are ones I would have liked to have answered, but they aren't necessary. Also, if these questions were brought up, it might have taken away from some of the appeal of the anime. One of my favorite aspects of Karin is how laid back, slice of life, and focused it is. The entire series is so contained and centered around just Karen's and Usui's life. We see them go to school, hang out with their family, work at their job, and see them develop a loving relationship. That's what the series is for a large portion of its run. Most of the show is made up of episodic stories that conclude by the end of an episode. For example, there's episode 11, which has Karen, Maki, and Winter spending the day at a pool together. A lot of this episode is just pure fun and humor, but we also learn some important info too. Karen realizes that Winter was the boy she bit many years ago, when we also find out a bit about Winter's past too. Despite there being a lot of focus on comedy, this episode and many others still provide important details about the show's lore or characters. Let's now look at the episode before this, that being episode 10. In this episode, Karen fails a test and now Usui has to help her study, otherwise her teacher will have to go to Karen's house and meet with her parents. So a fair amount of this episode centers around Usui helping Karen study, but there's a lot more to it than that. The actual purpose of this episode is for Karen and Usui to both realize how important their family is to them. During this episode, Karen's father believes that Usui is doing more than just studying with his daughter, aka having sexual intercourse.
Oh shit!
He starts spying on Karen at the library, gets caught, and gets yelled at by her. Not only is Karen having parental issues, but Usui is as well. The anniversary of the day his father left or died is coming up soon, and Usui does his best to try and avoid going to the cemetery with his mother. His father abandoned both of them when he was young, and it's never confirmed whether he's alive or not. Because he left his family, Usui despises his father, even though his mom still cares for him. After they both express their family issues with each other, they both both realize something important. Karin should be happy that she has a father to fight with, and Usui should respect his mother's wishes even though he may not agree with her. This episode is great. It may not be perfect since it is rushed a bit towards the end, but overall it is a really damn good episode. I would say it's one of the best episodes, but it's difficult to say, and there's a reason for that. The series is consistently great, and there's not much to complain about in terms of the episodes themselves. Surprisingly enough, the first couple episodes are probably the weakest in the series, even though they're the only canon ones. The main reason for this is because Usui spends nearly 4 full episodes being unaware that Karin is a vampire. Now I get it, this is something that needed to happen, but I feel that this could have been reworked and have occurred earlier, such as in episode 3 instead of 4. It's another nitpick I have, but it's clear that these episodes are a bit weaker in comparison to everything else. Then again, that just goes to show how great the rest of these episodes are. I have some minor annoyances with some of the last episodes, but they're all still really solid. There is, however, one episode in particular that sticks out, and not for a good reason. This is episode 18, which I'm going to call the faggot episode. I've seen the anime 4 times now, and I'm pretty sure I always forgot this episode existed, or at least I tried to. Besides the first and last couple minutes, the entirety of this episode takes place in a flashback where Ren was attending an all-boys high school. During this, he's mostly just bored and angry since he really doesn't want to be here, and I feel the same way. He's in a school with a bunch of sissy dudes, and there isn't a single slut in sight for him to feast on. While he's staying here, he shares his room with some random fag who's the biggest pussy in the school. Ren talks with him throughout the episode, he gets kidnapped, he saves him, and then his vampire powers awaken. Worst of all, he bites the guy, and it's really fucking gay.
What the hell is this?
My main problem with this episode is that it doesn't feel like a Karin episode. Besides the first and last couple minutes, this is just a 20-minute long flashback, so nothing here impacts the rest of the series. It's weird to say this since this episode does tell us how Ren's vampire powers awakened, as well as why he hates humans, or mainly men. But because a large majority of the episode is just one non-stop flashback, it feels sorta too contained, if that makes sense. I feel like this would have worked better if the flashback was told through Ren's perspective, and we had a B-plot of him doing something in the present. Maybe have him walk around town and see something that reminds him of this flashback and switch back and forth multiple times. I don't know, I just feel like that would have been better than this. Another reason why this doesn't feel like a Karin episode is because of the character designs. All of the guys at the school look like they belong in a completely different show. I get it, all of these characters are anime original, and not only that, but they're only here for one episode. That being said, they still don't fit the style of the show well. As mentioned, Winner is an anime original character, yet his design looks fine. Pretty much everything about this episode feels off, both narratively, visually, hell, it's not even that funny besides a few moments here and there.
Oh, are you going back to your room already, Maka?
Then give my regards to your gorgeous roommate, will you, old chum?
Oh yeah, some of the background characters have good voices too, but overall, this episode sucks. It's not horrible, it's just without question the absolute worst episode in the anime by a long shot. Well, I believe it's finally time to talk about one of Karin's strongest aspects, that being its ending. In episode 9+10, Karin's grandmother Elda returns, and apparently she found a way to turn Karin into a true vampire. Not only that, but Winner's grandfather comes to Japan and hunts down Elda and Karin. Winner finally finds out that Karin is a vampire, but doesn't care and helps her escape. The next day, Karin decides to confess to Usui, but before that happens, Usui gets the talk from Ren. He says that his and Karin's relationship would never work out because a vampire's life is much longer than a human's. He gets upset, but then quickly realizes that Ren is right. As much as he loves Karin, he has to face reality. Their relationship can't work. Not only that, but Ren tells him that Karin can become a real vampire as well. And even after that, Ren bows his head to Usui, begging for him to return his sister to him. Ren, the person who hates humans and complains about Karin, puts all of his pride aside since he has no other choice. I'll say it it now. This is easily one of the strongest scenes in the show. It's a great moment for both Ren and Usui. We see one of Ren's rare good sides, as well as seeing Usui realize he has to stop seeing Karin. It's not an easy scene to watch, and the same can be said even more for the next scene. Karin finds Usui in the park and is about to confess to him, but Usui tells her that they shouldn't see each other anymore. He says she should become a real vampire and be able to live with her family, since that's what's most important. He thanks her for everything, and then he runs away. I'm sorta mixed with this scene. By no means is it bad, but it's not one of my favorites either. It's cliche to split up Karin and Usui right before the series ends, especially since it's obvious that they'll end up together. I will say, however, that this is easily one of the better uses of this cliche. Karin being a vampire and living centuries longer than Usui is a genuine concern for their relationship. Not only that, but Ren pleading to Usui to give back his sister resonates with Usui a lot. He realizes that Ren isn't a bad person, plus family is extremely important to him. It makes sense that he'd want Karin to spend as much time with her family as she can. As much as it kills him, he knows there probably isn't anything he can do. Is this scene and the actions the characters make forced? No, I just think the story could have gone in a different and better direction. Still, this is completely fine. It just ends up being one of the weaker portions in the show just because it's very predictable. After this, Karin goes back home and decides to go through with becoming a true vampire. But then Winter's grandfather comes and burns down their entire house. While this is going on, Maki meets up with Winter, confesses, and then swaps spit with him like a boss. Meanwhile, at Usui's house, he realizes that he fucked up and leaves the next morning to go to Karin's house. He finds out that her house got raped, meets with Winter, and the two of them head towards where Karin and her family is. So they head towards Karin, her family gets MLG'd by Winter's grandpa, and then she turns into a real vampire. Before I continue, I want to quickly say that this episode looks great. The color design here is fantastic. I love the usage of blue and purples for the background, the water being entirely red, and how everyone is made up of just gray. I'll talk more about the art later, but this episode in particular looks great. I just had to mention that now. Anyway, Karin attacks Winter's grandpa for a bit, but then Usui finally comes. He lets Karin bite her, she turns back to normal, Grandpa tries to stab her, but then cuts her clothes on accident, revealing her nice bobas. He then gets a nosebleed and passes out. Now, I'm sure some people might not like this, but I think it works well. The last couple episodes, or even just the second half of the anime in general, takes a noticeable, more serious change of tone. Karin and Usui gradually realize that they're in love with each other. There's Elda's painful backstory, Anju hits puberty, there's some meaty shit here. Honestly, looking back, I'm surprised at how little comedy there is during the last 6 episodes. I guess I was so invested in the plot that I didn't seem to care or notice. It's weird because I think one of the best parts about Karin is its comedy. Even after 4 watches, I still managed to laugh at a bunch of these jokes. Remember when I said that a lot of people are scared of Usui because of his eyes? Well, that joke surprisingly isn't used that much. It's only used a couple times, and my favorite usage of it has to be when he looks through a hole in the wall at the school festival. All he does is shines a flashlight under his face, sits there and stares through the hole without doing anything. Yet this is terrifying to everyone else, and he gets shit on for being too scary. Not every joke lands though, although a ton of them still do. The only noticeable one that comes to mind is Winter always referring to Maki as Karin's friend and sidekick. It's funny the first couple times, but it gets a bit old after that. This is just a nitpick though, since, like I said, the large majority of the jokes do land for me. Anyway, back to the final episode.
You fucking stupid bitch!
So right before Grandpappy tried to kill Karin, Usui didn't give a fuck and confessed that he loves her. After the geezer passes out, Karin's family sucks out all the negative traits from him, and now he's a completely different person. Then we see Karin and Usui studying at the restaurant they work at. We also see Maki and Winter, and also find out that Usui's mom finally got a job working at the restaurant too. Karin calls Usui Kenta for the first time, and now they're on a first name basis. They're basically dating at this point, which is fucking great. The show doesn't outright state this, but it's pretty obvious. I mean, they both know they like each other anyway. anyway. It's not a perfect ending, but I'd say it's about the same as Mermaid's ending. It's a great season finale that can be labeled as a good series finale. The door is open for a second season, but as it is, I'm satisfied with how the anime ends. It's pretty solid, and it's also nice that this last episode is great too. As much as I love some series, one of the most common drawbacks they have is the lack of a good finale. Heaven's Lost Property might be the greatest thing on the planet, but even I have to admit that season 2's finale is not so great. The same can be said for Toradora, Baka the Test, and many others too. I'm just glad that Karin got a good ending. I'm able to relax and sleep at night knowing that Karin and Usui are together. Now, although I do very much enjoy this ending, it isn't perfect. It is a bit rushed towards the end, and I would have liked to have seen more from both Karin and Usui, as well as Winner and Maki. Winner only found out about Maki's love for him in episode 23, so there wasn't much to work with. Still though, I would have liked to have seen something more than just Maki pulling on Winner's ear. Maybe have Winner finally call Maki by her actual name. I feel like that would have been small yet satisfying. More importantly though was Karin and Usui's relationship. Yes, they are happy together, but I still think we should have seen Karin confess to him too. We only get to see Usui confess, and that was quickly followed with Epstein trying to kill her. We should have seen Karin give a response to him. That would have been nice. However, again, judging by their conversation and expressions, it's clear that the two of them are dating now, and that's good enough for me. Yeah, at least we get a conclusion here, which I know I shouldn't have to say. But yes, Karin thankfully has at the very least a good and satisfying ending. With that said, I think this brings me to the next segment of the video. It's time to talk about why Karin's cast of characters is #poggers.
Run.
The best aspect of Karin has to be its memorable and likable cast of characters. Every character here is at the very least good. There isn't a single one that I didn't care for or dislike, and yes, that includes Winner. But before I defend Winner, I'll first talk about Karin and Usui because they are the main characters after all. As for Karin, there isn't really a whole lot to say about her. Besides her being an unvampire, she's basically just a normal high school girl. She's clumsy, caring, funny, and most importantly, very sexy. She can suck the blood from my cock any day. In all seriousness though, Karin is great. I don't know exactly where she is in the rankings, but I think it's safe to say that she's in my top 25 favorite waifus. Next up is Kenta Usui, and he's also great. I don't have any issues with him. Similar to Karin, he's just a genuine, nice and caring person, which is why I like him. Now, usually I complain about this in my reviews, but honestly, I've never had any problems with Usui. He's not an amazing character or anything, but he's still pretty good. I guess the main reason I enjoy him so much is because he's such a hardworking and caring person. He studies hard, looks out for Karin, and works a part-time job in order to help support his mother. He's a great dude, but I don't think him being a good person defines who he is as a character, which is why I never seem to dislike him. Unlike some other harem protagonists, Usui isn't entirely perfect. As mentioned, his father left both him and his mother a long time ago when they still don't even know if he's alive or not. Because of this, Usui has despised and held a grudge towards his father ever since his mother told him. Even though his mother still seems to love him, Usui doesn't care for him at all. As mentioned in one episode, she wants him to visit his grave with her, but he continues to avoid going because he hates his father that much. Although he is being selfish here, he's not entirely in the wrong. Why should he go see the grave of the guy who abandoned both his wife and son? He's not in their life anymore, so he shouldn't waste his time on a person like him. Still, at the end of the episode, he does decide to go with his mother because it'll make her happy. Even if he doesn't agree with her, making his mother happy is what matters most to him. That's the reason why he works so hard. He wants his mother to relax and not have to worry about stuff like paying the rent. I also wouldn't be surprised if some of his motivation in being a good person came from his hatred towards his father. I could be wrong here, but it's just something I wanted to mention. Another reason why I enjoy Usui is because he's not too dense, and he's also not a pussy either. About halfway into the series, Usui and Karin start to realize that they're both in love with each other. They start blushing around each other more, they get closer to each other, and at the end they start dating. The romance in Karin is another aspect that's genuinely pretty solid. The relationship between Karin and Usui feels real. Throughout the series, you slowly see them develop a relationship and watch it grow. By episode 19, it's clear that the two of them love each other, and it was only a matter matter of time before one of them confessed. However, due to plot, this had to be delayed until the final episode, which, like I said before, I'm sorta mixed on. But at least the two of them progressed to a point where they were about to confess before the finale. There is progress and development in Karin, which is something I can't say for other romances, such as We Never Learn. I know the romance in the series isn't the main focus, it's mainly a harem comedy, but it's still an aspect of the show. The romance in the anime is pretty weak and nothing really develops, or at least if something does develop, it's so small that it usually doesn't mean much in the long run. Not only is the relationship between Karin and Usui great, but so is the relationship between a lot of these characters, especially Karin's family. I always enjoyed the dynamic of Karin's family. Karin expresses how much she loves her family, but they don't seem to do the same. Anju, her father and grandmother show their affection for her, but Ren and her mother barely do. Ren typically finds Karin to be annoying and dumb and doesn't seem to like her that much. However, later on we learn that a strong reason for this is because of how similar she looks to their grandmother. When Ren was a kid, his grandmother would give him a lot of attention and almost ended up killing him. So because he's terrified and doesn't like their grandmother, he puts that all out on Karin. Then there's Karin's mother, who, while not showing much affection for her family a majority of the time, also shows that she hates her mother-in-law. There's Anju, who, like Karin, likes her family very much, but she loves Karin the most. There's at least one interesting relationship one character has with another, but I'm not going to list all of them. Well, that's about it for Karin's cast. It's great, everyone's likable, nothing to complain about.
Hold up. Wait a minute.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot. It's time to talk about Winner. Karin's anime was not received too well by viewers. One thing that many people seem to complain about was the inclusion or addition of Winner. A lot of people find him pointless, but mainly just annoying. It's not even that a lot of people dislike him. They hate him.
I hate this character so goddamn much that there aren't any words in the English language that could possibly describe it. Unless you've seen this anime, you cannot possibly comprehend just how god-awfully, horrendously annoying this guy is.
Like, holy shit, he's not that bad. In fact, he's not even bad at all. Actually, I like his character quite a bit. He's not my favorite character in the show, but I still find him enjoyable, entertaining, and funny. I mean, come on, you're telling me this isn't good?
Now show me your true form, you washboard.
I know comedy is subjective, but I think a lot of the Winter Center jokes land for me. I always liked how over the top and silly he was as a character. He's a vampire hunter who hunts vampires in 2005. He's in love with Karin, who's an unvampire, yet he's too stupid to notice that she's part of a family of vampires. Despite being a vampire hunter, he's also disgusted and gets nauseous by the sight of blood. It's so stupid, but that's why I like it. A lot of Karin's charm is that it's a silly slice of life rom-com. I get that many fans enjoy the manga because of its darker and well-written story, but enjoy the anime for what it is. I honestly don't know what the anime would be like without Winner. He's an important character, so getting rid of him would drastically change some of the series, or at the very least, the last couple episodes would be entirely different. However, I don't think Winner is as important or gets the amount of screen time that people say he does. Winner might be a side character that occasionally gets a spotlight, but that's the thing, it's only on occasions. He makes his first appearance in episode 7 and has a big role in episodes 8 and 11, but after that, he barely does anything until episode 9+10 when his grandfather comes to Japan. For most of the show, he's just a side character that's there for comic relief. A lot of the focus is still on Karin and Usui, which is great. I'd have a problem with Winner if he acted as a third main character and interrupted the progress of Karin and Usui's relationship, but thankfully he doesn't do that. It's not like this scene in Infinite Stratos where all the girls come out of nowhere and prevent Hoki and Ichika from kissing. If he did something similar to this, especially on a regular basis, then I'd probably hate him. But like I said, he doesn't, which is good. Another weird complaint I've heard is that Winner turned Karin's and Usui's relationship into a love triangle, which isn't true. A love triangle implies that one person is in love with two people at the same time. It could also mean that three people love one person in a group, but none of their love is neutral. In Karin, there is no love triangle. mutual. Karin loves Usui, and Usui and Winner love Karin. Karin and Usui's love is mutual, so Winner is just a third wheel, I guess. Karin never even thinks of Winner as a potential love interest, and thank God. It's obvious that she's going to end up with Usui, so if that did happen, then that would be really bad. The most and actually only thing I could find was of her blushing near Winner in the pool episode. It's very small, but you have to remember that Karin blushes a lot, so it really doesn't mean much. Those are the only ways that I could see myself finding Winner to be annoying. I believe people find him annoying because of his voice, and also because he's so aggressive towards Karin. First off, let's talk about his voice. I took a quick glance at the sub, and his voice seems normal, or at least not as bad as people say it was. What most people are referring to, though, is his English voice.
Kenta Usui, I have formally challenged you to a duel for the right to pursue Miss Karin's love, of course. I thank you for sending me to this lovely little town. Beware all vampires!
Yep, that is a voice, and that is English. Honestly, I never found his voice to be annoying. I always thought it was funny because of how dumb and bad it sounded. But like I said, comedy is subjective. Stuff I find funny could be something someone else finds obnoxious and annoying. You're never going to please everyone, and Winner is a perfect example of that. Alright, now I'm actually done talking about its characters, so it's time to quickly talk about its art.
Your mother's a nice woman, but your grandma's a whore. And she sucked my wiener until I saw her teeth in my butthole.
Karin was animated by JC Staff, and it looks okay. Without a doubt, Karin's art is its worst aspect. It's at best decent, but even at worst, it's just passable or mediocre. It's fairly well animated, colorful, and has some good character designs. I always thought Karin's family had solid designs, but some others like Usui and his mother are kinda generic looking. Although some of the designs are good, it's not too hard to find shots of characters being off-model. It's not too bad, but it happens more than I would like it to. One neat detail I appreciated was that there's a different transition card or animation for every single episode. It's something they didn't need to do, but they did anyway, and I like it. As mentioned earlier, the last episode actually looks great. The color design is fantastic. Unfortunately, the rest of the series isn't nearly as visually interesting as this one. It sucks, but it's not a big deal. Besides that though, there's not anything else to say. Karin looks sorta fine. It's not great, but it isn't bad either. Karin's soundtrack is pretty damn good. There's a fair amount of good and even great tracks. The only nitpick I have is that some of them are just altered or slightly different variations of each other. So that means there isn't a lot of variety, but at least they're all good. Not only that, but its opening song kicks ass and its ending theme is fantastic. There are too many great anime opening and ending themes, but I feel comfortable saying that Karin's ending is one of my favorites. Besides the soundtrack, there's the English dub, which is very unique to say the least. I can't lie, this dub is kinda shit, or at least in terms of acting. Some of the voices and deliveries are laughably bad, such as Winner's, however, I'm still able to enjoy it and take it seriously. I guess one of the reasons I like the dub despite its quality is because of how unique it is. Not only is there below average acting, but it's made up of actors who have basically done nothing. Not a single actor here has done more than a few other roles outside of this. These are basically just random people they picked up off the streets and put into a recording booth. Even Ren's actor hasn't done anything else. He's only done Ren in the narrator's voice. But yeah, there's not a single voice in Karin's dub that you've heard from another show, and that's why I like it. The acting might be kinda crappy, but I think the voices fit the characters, or maybe it's just that I'm so used to them by now. When watching nearly every single dub, I'm able to figure out and recognize who voices who in each show. It's a fun thing I like to do while watching, but it also pulls me out of the show a bit. It's like, oh yeah, this actor voices this character who voiced like 100 other characters. It's kinda distracting while watching, but that's mainly due to dubbing companies not having the budget to afford more and even better actors. I get why people dislike Karin's dub, but I'm perfectly fine with admitting that it's a guilty pleasure of mine. One very small nitpick about the dub that I will complain about is the sound mixing. Now the audio in general sounds fine, but for whatever reason it sounds notably worse whenever characters are speaking to themselves in their heads.
I wonder what that sensation was all about. My chest hurt so badly, almost instinctively.
I don't know what they did exactly, but it sounds off and not right. If I'm just being a retard again, then let me know in the comments, but I still think it sounds weird. Also, this is pretty epic.
To Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin, who turned to Boris Grushenko.
I said shut
and
up.
he said to Boris Badenov that.
Shut up!
Shut up! No, he said that.
Shut up!
Well, that was Karin, and unsurprisingly, it was still as great as it was the last 3 times I watched it. It might have some very small problems, but overall, there isn't a lot to complain about. Unique premise, great cast, consistently entertaining and funny, and also has a solid ending. There's a lot to love in Karin, which is why I'm giving it a 9.37 out of 10. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking that I'm rating this way too high, but I don't really care. I love this show, and I genuinely feel that it deserves this score. And if you disagree with me, then I'd be more than interested in hearing your thoughts in the comments section.
Hello, food. Food broke. Understandable. Have a great day.
Jesus, this video is already pretty long, but I guess it's gonna be even longer now. I said I watched the anime 3 times before this, and I've also only read the manga once. It's been 5 years since I last read it, and I'm honestly not too sure if my thoughts are going to change that much. I'm hoping it's better than I remember it being, but I know for sure that I'm still going to greatly prefer the anime. Anyway, let's see how the manga compares to the anime.
Back at it again at Krispy Kreme.
Okay, so for the last 40 minutes, I just talked about how Karin's anime is great and stated that it's notably better than its manga. Well, that's what I initially thought when I wrote it at least. However, after I finished writing that section of the video, I went and read the entire manga and did so in the span of only 3 days. Going into it, I had a feeling I would enjoy the manga more this time than I did during my first read, which I remind you was 5 years ago. Although I figured I'd only enjoyed a bit more and maybe even notably more too. But even so, I thought I'd have the same opinion that although the manga is great, I still do prefer the anime. Well, now it turns out that's not the case. Yes, after all that talking I just did, some of it is now immediately obsolete. The reason why I didn't go back and change some of my thoughts was because it shows how my thoughts can change over the years. It shows that I was too hard on the manga originally and didn't realize how good it actually was. Also, it's because I'm lazy, but that's besides the point. The point is that I was wrong, and because of that, I will now be talking about why Karin's manga is actually amazing. So, I guess we might as well start from the beginning. Similar to the anime, the manga's beginning chapters and arcs are notably weaker than the rest of the series. Obviously, they aren't bad. In fact, they're all still very solid and enjoyable. It's just that they aren't as engaging as the later arcs are. One thing that is interesting about these chapters is seeing the large amount of differences compared to the anime. These changes can be noticed and seen as early as just the first page. Now, when I first read this, I thought this was Winter, but obviously that's not the case because he isn't in the manga. I then thought this was supposed to be the same opening scene from the first episode of the anime, but that also isn't true. Karin here is wearing her high school uniform and clearly isn't a child, so I'm going to assume this is just her with some random guy. It doesn't matter though, this is probably just here to help hint at Karin being a vampire, I guess. So anyway, after this we get basically the same scene where Karin wakes up and gets ready for school. The only difference I noticed was that Karin is much more sad and depressed here. In the anime, she wakes up not feeling well, but after that, she's happy eating breakfast and saying goodbye, even though she's all alone. After this, the rest of the chapter is basically just the first half of the anime's first episode. Karin goes to school, Usui transfers in, Karin passes out, she leaves, and Usui catches her biting someone in the woods. However, because I'm a degenerate, I of course notice some very small changes and additions. For starters, there's the obvious, which are the character designs. Most of them look fine, but Usui looks much different here, and it's kinda jarring. He sorta looks like a bootleg Ichigo from Bleach. Luckily, his as well as other characters' designs change throughout the manga's run, and thankfully for the better. It's common for a manga style and design to change over the years. It's especially so for the beginning chapters and volumes, since the creator hasn't perfected or gotten used to drawing these characters yet. I'd say around chapter 9 or 10 is when the designs improve, especially Usui's. But some other characters like Henry still don't look quite right, but I'll talk about the art in more detail later. Back to the first chapter before I get get off topic. So like I was saying, there are some changes and additions found here. For example, when Karin and Maki are in the nurse's office, Karin thinks about and almost tries to bite Maki. However, in the manga, she just thinks about it and doesn't move close to bite her. One notable addition that we get are 2 pages centering around the businessman that Karin bites at the end of the chapter. In the anime, we just see him sleeping before Karin comes and bites him, and then after that, he runs off and is never seen again. In the manga, we even get another page showing how his life has changed after getting bitten. Although it's sort of interesting to see this, I don't think these 3 extra pages were necessary. I think it's clear that something within him changed in the anime after Karin bit him. This is just one of the small things where I'd say the anime did it better, although not by much. I think the same can be said for the rest of the first 20 or so chapters. They're all still very solid chapters, but I kinda just wished I were watching the anime's version of them. But like I said, I did enjoy spotting all the small differences between the two. There's a fair amount of them I noted, but I'm not going to go over every single one in detail because that'd just be repetitive. Here's a list of everything I noticed while reading. Some are very small and don't change anything, but there are other minor changes that do make somewhat of a difference. For example, there's Karin getting her nosebleed with Usui in the stairwell at school. This happened at the very end of the first episode and happens here towards the end of chapter 3. This is one minor change where I'd say it makes a notable difference even though the events are nearly identical. Having Karin get her nosebleed and revealing that she isn't a normal vampire is a big part of the series. It was a great way to end off the first episode and makes you wonder what the hell is gonna happen next. In the manga though, this happens midway through chapter 3, which isn't even the last chapter in the volume. It doesn't leave nearly as big of an impact as it did in the anime. It also doesn't help that the scene continues after Karin gets her nosebleed. After she does, she tells Usui to keep her secret, he cleans it up, and then carries her home. In the anime, this was moved to the beginning of episode 2. It worked better there because, like I said, the ending of episode 1 left off on a strong note. Karin gets a nosebleed and splatters blood all over the stairway. After that, she quickly explains that she's an unvampire, and then it cuts to the end credits. Now, to be fair, the manga was made first, and there really isn't much it could have done about this. I'm mainly bringing this up because I think it's a scene that was improved upon in the anime. It's still a good scene and a good chapter, it's just not as good as the anime's version. And I think the same can be said for the first manga-only arc, which spans from chapter 7 to chapter 13. Remember in episode 4 where some asshole was trying to get Karin to work for them in a love hotel? Well, that happens here, except the dude is bald and he's also kind of important too. Apparently, he was looking for one of his workers who also happens to be the girl that Karin bites here in the manga. In the anime, it was some random woman, but here it's actually one of her classmates who works at the love hotel for the bald dude. Her name is Harumi, and she ran away from home because her parents split up, which made her very sad. Because of that, she decided to start working for a love hotel, even though that's illegal because she's only 16.
Oh my god!
Also working at this love hotel is Usui's mother Fumio, but only as a janitor. She meets Harumi and ends up forming a decent relationship with her and tries to get her to quit her job. However, Harumi refuses to because she's a fat whore. Fumio then dresses up as a high schooler, goes to the police, and they shut down the business because the Bude was running it and employing underage girls. Harumi then goes back home to her father, and now everything's back to normal. Overall, these are good chapters, although similar to the businessman in chapter 1, I don't think they were entirely necessary. It was cut from the anime and for mostly good reasons too. I said this arc lasts from chapter 7 to 13, but it doesn't last for all of those chapters. Harumi gets introduced in chapter 7, gets 2 pages in chapter 9, and doesn't really do anything until chapter 12. So really, she only gets a spotlight for 2 chapters, and even then we still do see a fair amount of Karin and Usui, so it's not like the series randomly starts to center around her. The best that came from these chapters and scenes had to be Fumio. In the anime, Fumio really didn't get to do anything. She was a lonely, hard-working mother who misses her ex and also got harassed at work too.
I'm going to rape you!
At most, she was used as a plot device in order to make Karin worry about Ren biting her. But besides that, she was just a miserable yet caring mother. Here in these chapters though, Fumio at least gets to do something. She dresses up as a high schooler and gets the police to shut down an entire business because they were letting old men fuck some kids. And after that, she helps Harumi escape and then starts screaming at her. Serves her right. fucking bitch. So yeah, this is a side of Fumio that we didn't get to see in the anime, so it's kinda cool that we get to see it here. Still though, this is a quote arc that does feel like filler. I'm still fine with it being here, especially since it does let us see a new side of Fumio, but I just don't think it was entirely necessary. After this, we get the chapter 13.5, which is the first bonus chapter of the series. Throughout the manga, there are 5 bonus chapters, and they actually aren't just random extra chapters. Most of them are important and show us some interesting stories, the first of which is this chapter, and it's pretty cool. For starters, we get to see Anju go to school, which is something that we never got to see in the anime. She goes looking for Boogie, and it turns out that one of her classmates, Teranashi, found him and then takes him home with her. However, when she does, she accidentally lets out Boogie's true form, which is the soul of a serial killer. Apparently, since Boogie has been away from Anju for so long, the seal of him being trapped in his doll got weaker, which allowed him to break free. So now he goes and runs around this little girl's house and tries to kill her, which is both funny and terrifying. But of course, Anju comes, seals him back up, and takes him back home with her. Overall, it's a really cool and fun chapter. It tells us something new and important about this very minor side character, and does so in such a great way. We also learn that all of Anju's dolls have souls trapped inside them, since she has the ability to seal souls inside things. Like I said, this chapter is pretty damn good, and I think the others are just as good or even better than this too. Well, that is for Special 4, which is easily the worst of the 5. It's a good chapter, it just isn't as impressive or important as the rest. It takes place back when Karin was a kid, and also when she first met Maki. Basically, she becomes friends with her, but then starts to avoid her because she knows that one day she'll have to erase her memories and never see her again. But then her parents tell her that she can continue to be with humans since being in the daylight doesn't bother her. So then they go back to being friends and the chapter ends. It's interesting seeing Karin struggle and have to think about not being able to see any humans again. I will give the chapter that. But that's all it really has going for it. The only other neat details here were that Karin learned to cook because of Maki's mom, and the fact that Maki was able to bypass the barrier because of her dog. That's about it though. This chapter is good, but definitely the weakest out of the 5. In the 3rd chapter, we get to see Henry and Carrera back when they were kids. Apparently, Carrera's clit was hard for Henry's father, but then realized that she had to go for Henry instead because why not? It's a great chapter, and I think the author could have made an entire volume solely about their relationship. I would have liked to have seen more flashbacks about them, but we at least do get one more flashback chapter. However, this chapter focuses on Elda and Karen's grandfather James instead. This takes place 200 years ago, where all the vampires were betrayed by a half-vampire who showed the humans where they all lived. After that, many of them were killed and forced to escape to Japan, which is why their family lives here now. This chapter is similar to the previous one I just went over with Henry and Carrera. Basically, we see Elda suffer since she just lost both her parents, but then eventually starts to fall for James. It's another great chapter, and I'm glad it's here for fans to enjoy. Now we finally get to the 2nd special, and there's a reason why I saved it for last. This extra chapter is what inspired episode 18 of the anime, and yes, there's a reason why I chose the word inspired. That's because this telling of Ren's past is completely different. In the anime, Ren was in high school, and more specifically, an all-boys high school. Disgusting! During that time, he was forced to dorm at the school and also suck the blood of a guy that he mistook for a girl. In the manga, none of this happens. The only similarity is that Ren awakens and does so at school. That's it. First off, he's only in middle school here, and it's a normal one too. During this chapter, he forms a relationship with Hinata Fujitani, which you shouldn't mistake for Makoto Fujitani. Yeah, I was very confused when I read this. I thought the chapter would go the same direction the anime did, where it'd have Ren get close to Fujitani, but then have him find out that she's a boy. But no, that doesn't happen. Apparently, the anime decided to keep just the last name of one of the characters the same, and that was it. I don't understand what the thought process was for making episode 18 of the anime. I really don't. So anyway, Ren awakens and ends up not even biting Fujitani. He instead bites his teacher since she has a lot of stress within her. The story is still about Ren and Hinata, it just doesn't have him biting her and it didn't need to. Ren instead starts to gain feelings towards her and is irritated and sad that he can't get to be with her anymore. And then we get to the last page, which is very similar to the anime, where Ren sees Fujitani walking in the streets at night. However, this one difference changes quite a bit, or at least for the anime it does. was. One plot hole that I mentioned earlier was that the bite marks and their effects on people were inconsistent. Well, that was mainly due to this scene at the very end of episode 18. I now know that they just took random elements from this chapter, adapted parts of it, and ended up creating one big plot hole for the anime. So at least the manga is consistent with its plot and lore, although the anime is kinda screwed up because of this very minor scene. I could just believe that this episode isn't canon, which would solve the problem, but then I'd be lying and I don't want to turn into a Democrat. So yeah, those were the bonus chapters, and for the most part, they're pretty great. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, I left off around chapter 13. So after the Harem arc, the next couple chapters are basically just the same as the anime. Karin starts to work at a Chinese restaurant, Ren still tries to go after Usui's mother, and Karin almost bites Usui. There are some differences, such as where Karin tries to bite Usui. Here it's in the bottom of some building parking lot, which looks similar to the one that Ren and Usui were in episode 22. In the anime, they're on a boat, on a roof, or in a park, I think. I really can't tell even after rewatching the scene multiple times, but either way, the setting is different. After these chapters, Zelda wakes up and it's sorta similar to the anime. Some scenes and ideas are nearly identical to the anime. There's a school festival, she's curious about Karin not awakening yet, she still doesn't like Usui or any humans for that matter, etc. But besides those, there's a lot of changes the anime made, such as her backstory. Obviously, the Sinclairs were only in the anime, so it makes sense why her backstory is dramatically different. Another thing that's clearly different is Zelda's blood affinity. In the anime, her type was love, but here it's youth. At first I thought her type was going to be love again, or maybe happiness, since young people are probably more happy than older people, I guess. But then this never gets brought up again, so I kind of forgot about it until I started writing this section of the review. It also doesn't help that apparently Henry is surprised about his mother wanting young blood. You're telling me that he's never known what his mother's blood type was for his entire life? I thought for sure this was a hint that Elda's type wasn't youth, but was something else, but I guess not. Also, how does sucking out someone's youth even work? Does that mean after they get bitten, they get older or act more mature? This is the one time where seeing the after effects of someone being bitten would kind of help. But whatever, it's not a big problem, I just don't understand how it works. So anyway, Elda bites some young thugs at school, but also collects blood too. Apparently, she's collecting blood for her husband James because he's still sleeping. I didn't realize this until just now, but I don't believe the manga ever stated what James' affinity was. I only found out what it was by looking it up on the wiki, and according to it, his blood's affinity is also youth. That's sorta weird considering no one else in the series has the same blood affinity. Actually, now that I think about it, that could have made for an interesting premise. It would have been cool to see two vampires fight between the same human or humans, but I guess we sorta got that with Ren and Karin going after Usui's mom, although not really. I don't know, just a random idea I came up with. So anyway, Elda and Karin go back to their house, but... Yep, so James is dead. Okay, in all seriousness, this is pretty sad. Elda has been with James for nearly 200 years and now he's dead. This is definitely where the manga starts to take a notably darker and serious change of tone. There were already some darker elements earlier, such as Harem selling her body in order to make money, but she never actually did anything. However, this is the death of a family member, which is very significant here since family is a key part of the series. To Karin, family is everything, and although she never met her grandfather, it's still brutal to see her grandmother go through this. The series still has its charming and lighthearted moments, but from here on there is a notable tonal shift that can be seen during the next arc, which finally reveals Usui's dad. But hold up. Before we get to that, there is one more important thing that happens within these chapters. That being that we actually get to see more vampires that aren't part of the Maka family. Yeah, so apparently every year Henry and Carrera go to a meeting made up of the remaining vampires in the country. They talk about how they hate humans, but also important issues as well. One of those being that the number of vampires has been decreasing over the years. For whatever reason, it's quite difficult to make a vampire child despite Carrera giving birth to 3 of them. them. They believe it has to do with her bloodline, but we'll find out more about that later. So anyway, now we can move on to the first manga-only arc, or at least the first one that isn't just 2 or 3 chapters long. In it, Usui's dad shows up and is looking for Fumio and Usui. He eventually meets up with Karin and Usui, and Usui is like, "Fuck you, faggot, I don't know you." Apparently, Usui's dad is there to bring them back home with them, which is not very epic. So Karin says, "Hey, why don't you come live and hide at my place until your fairy father leaves?" So they ask her parents, they say no, Usui gets sad, and then Karin gets another nosebleed. Because of this, Karin's parents realize that Usui caused her nosebleed and will probably continue to do so for a while. While Karin is passed out for 6 whole days, Henry lets Usui and Fumio stay at an abandoned temple behind their house. However, he only did so because Usui agreed to never see Karin again. This is the one part of the manga that sorta irritated me. I wasn't a big fan of this cliche in the anime, and the same applies here. We all know Usui is going to see Karin again. It's dumb, it's annoying, and I don't like it. It makes sense for both characters to act in the way that they did, but come on, I'm sure the author could have done something better here. Again, this isn't horrible or even bad, but it's clearly my least favorite part of the manga. It's a shame because a lot of this arc is great. Karin, Usui, and even Fumio get some great moments. There's this one scene where Fumio tells Karin that she was told by her mother to abort Usui, but even so, she still decided to give birth to him, and because of that, her mother has continued to ignore the fact that Usui even exists to this day. Now, while this scene is exceptional, the next one isn't. Like at all. So Karin and Usui meet up, and Usui starts acting like a hop knocker. He tells Karin that they won't be able to talk with each other again. Karin gets upset and tells him that he only needs to be happy. Usui then realizes that Karin's affinity was unhappiness and thinks she was just hanging out with him because of that. He then yells at her and then leaves.
Why did you leave me?
What a piece of shit. You know what? I lied. This is actually the worst part of the manga. It's obnoxious, it's stupid, it's dumb, it's a big load of poopy caca. This feels really forced and out of character for Usui. I know he instantly regrets it in the next chapter, but still, this is not very cash money. Obviously though, they make up, and then, Jesus Christ, it's Pickle Rick, Karin bites Usui.
Damn!
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I got an erection while reading this, and I'm proud of it. So after this, Usui, Fumio, and his dad go to a restaurant and they talk about all their problems. It turns out that Usui's dad wasn't a cuntbag Nazi fag all along, and he was actually a decent person. Usui realizes this too, which is why he refers to him as his father right before he leaves. It's definitely one of the best moments in the manga. It's a very touching and satisfying moment. So anyway, after this, a new hot mama named Tachibana comes into town, and no, not that one. This is Tachibana Yuria, not Tachibana America. I wish it was though, because I want America to spread her ass cheeks and clog my throat with her tasty gust of wind. During these next couple chapters, Tachibana hangs out with Usui and Karin for a bit. Karin also mistakes Usui for being in a relationship with her, which is kinda dumb, but whatever, it's not a big deal. At least Karin and Usui get a fair amount of alone time during these chapters. But then a couple nights later, Usui has a dream and sees Karin, or at least someone who looks like her. Apparently, she's a spirit that takes the form of whoever is most precious to the person Karin bites and appears in their dreams. So for example, Fumio saw Usui's dad back when she was bitten by Karin. It's kinda cool, kinda weird, and kinda confusing, but I like it. Then the next day, Karin and Usui go on a date at the zoo, and then...
Holy shit!
Yep, Usui confesses to Karin like a boss, and it's one of the best scenes in the manga. One thing I love about this is that this happens in chapter 36. There are still 22 chapters left after this, which is more than enough time for Karin and Usui to continue to deepen their relationship. I'm so glad this wasn't dragged out until the final chapter or arc. Early on into the series, it's clear that the two of them love each other, so there isn't much else they could do to progress their relationship besides becoming a couple. Plus, it would have gotten annoying annoying to see them blush at each other all the time and be too embarrassed to do anything else. So anyway, Karin and Usui become a couple, but then, stinky. It turns out that Tachibana is a vampire. And not only that, but she's been sent here by her uncle in order to spy on the Maka family. Yeah, it was kind of obvious that Tachibana wasn't just a normal girl, or at least was going to cause some kind of conflict for Karin and Usui. Still though, it is a fun twist and I think it works pretty well. This is mainly because Tachibana has already become a somewhat sympathetic character at this point, so it's difficult to root for her when she's also trying to harm Karin and Usui. After this though, we get to chapter 43, which is the Anju Awakening arc. Now in the anime, I'd say that episode 20, which was Anju's Awakening, was the best episode. It's not an easy pick or anything, but I feel comfortable saying that it's my favorite. Because of that, I was very curious to see how her awakening would happen in the manga, or if it would even happen at all. Her awakening doesn't start until the last 15 chapters, which is pretty late into the series run. By the time I got to this, I was sorta like, oh yeah, I guess Anju still hasn't awakened yet. I kinda forgot about it, but I was still excited to see how the arc differed from the anime. Speaking of the anime, I kind of gained a new appreciation for it after reading the manga. During the anime's production and airing, the manga was still only about halfway done. Because of this, JC's staff made numerous and drastic changes, such as adding in new characters, changing key events in the series, and writing an original ending. Not only that, but they even included and sort of adapted material and ideas that weren't even in the manga yet. This of course being Anju's Awakening, which wasn't seen in the manga until at least 6 months after the anime ended. This is really the only time the anime did this, but it's still cool to see these ideas appear before they did in the manga. Now as for the arc itself, it's great, although I wouldn't say it's necessarily better than its anime version. I think they're about the same in terms of quality, with each of them being better and worse in different ways. One of the biggest differences with the manga's version is its length. The anime only dedicated 1 episode to this arc, whereas here it's an entire volume long, totaling at 4 chapters. Because of this, we get plenty of time to understand what Anju is going through. She doesn't want to awaken because then she won't be able to see Karin as often and can't go out in the sunlight anymore. Awakening for a vampire kinda sucks. You lose your ability to taste food, you need to drink blood to survive, and you can't go out when the sun is up or else you'll die. So yeah, this is a really shitty time for Anju, and it also doesn't help that she's awakening earlier than most vampires tend to. Besides Anju, the story also gives room to focus on one of her friends from school, Koibuchi. He's a super duper smart kid, but his mother is a fucking bitch. He's been raised to become the smartest kid in his school because that's how Japan works, I guess. His mother is like, hey kid, wanna go to a normal middle school? And he's like, hell yeah, that would be epic. But then she's like, haha, lol, WinRAR XD's nuts, your mom gay, 420 Xbox 360 no scope. You're actually going to a private school or some shit because I hate you. So then he starts to feel lonely because none of his friends are going to the same school as him. And because of this, Anju begins to awaken at school because loneliness just so happens to be your blood's affinity. Yeah, so unlike the anime where her affinity was jealousy, here it's loneliness. Honestly, I think this fits Anju a lot better. It makes more sense for her to be lonely rather than being jealous of Usui and Maki. Sure, I can understand how Anju could grow to become jealous, but I think loneliness is much more fitting for her. So she bites him, starts crying afterwards, and then the arc ends. Now I know I left out a lot of details, but I don't want to summarize any more than I have to. Plus this video is already insanely long as is. Like I said about a minute ago, while I think both versions of this arc are great, I think the anime was stronger in one area, that being Maki as the person Anju bites instead of Koibuchi. Koibuchi is a decent character, and we do get to see him for a short while before the arc starts, so it's not like he's just some random kid who we don't know much about. Still though, he's not that interesting of a character. He's fine, but I don't care much about him. On the other hand, Maki is a character who we've gotten to know for the entirety of the anime. It's also worth noting that she's in the anime much more than she is in the manga. In the manga, she doesn't get much time dedicated to her because she wasn't really important to the plot. But in the anime, she got a lot more screen time and fell for Winter, so that's something at least. And because she fell in love with Winter, she grows jealous of Karin since she's getting all of his attention. It's also because her relationship with Usui is pretty good instead of hers, which is just being called Karin's friend and sidekick all the fucking time. During the anime's run, we've seen Maki fail at getting Winter's attention, and because of all these times, we understand what she's going through. This is why she works better as the one being bitten instead of Koibuchi. Is it a big improvement? No, but I think it's a notable one. Like I said, the manga does have its strengths in this arc, but I think the anime did this one aspect better.
I can suck your dick.
So after this, we finally get to the last arc of the manga. But before that, I'll quickly go over the arc because I don't know where else to put this section into the video. So overall, I'd say the manga looks decent. As I said earlier, the beginning chapters don't look so great. Some of the designs aren't very appealing, and Usui looks like one of his testicles is dislocated. That being said, the designs and art in general do improve rather quickly. By the end of volume 2, the art has clearly gotten better, but still it's nothing amazing. It looks decent and has some occasional solid panels, but for the most part, it's just alright. Not only does it occasionally look better, but it also occasionally looks worse. I'd say at least once per chapter or every other chapter, there's some sort of error or oddity. Usually there's at least one panel where a character will be drawn out of proportion or just seem off. It's nothing too bad, it's just strange that there's a fair amount of times where I've seen this. It isn't too difficult to skim through a chapter and find a bizarre looking page, panel, or character. Like I said though, the manga's art is overall okay. It progressively gets better as it goes on, but it is a bit inconsistent too. Alright, now I can actually talk about the final arc. So, Karin and Usui are having a jolly gay old time, but then Karin starts to feel down in the dumpities. That's because she finally decides to tell Usui the bad news that Elda told her a while ago. That being that when humans and vampires have the funny sex, their children are born sterile. That's fancy smanchy talk for they can't reproduce. I always wondered what would happen if a vampire and a human had a kid, and now I know. It sorta makes sense. I mean, something has to fuck up when two different species breed. So, Karin's all sad because Usui can't live his dream of having a normal family. But then he tells her that he loves her and that she's his happiness. Aww. So then they're all happy and shit, and they even kiss too. But things can't stay happy like this for long because there's still another 2 volumes left. So Tachibana brings Karin to Tilted Towers, her uncle comes and kidnaps her and then takes her back to his evil epic lair. Now why is Tachibana's uncle so obsessed with Karin's underage pussy? Well, that's because Karin is a special type of vampire known as a Pashuki. Pashukis are a rare type of vampire that only appear whenever vampires are on the verge of extinction, I think. You see, there's actually a reason why Karin's blood increases about once a month or whenever she reacts to someone's unhappiness. Her blood was meant to increase in order to give it to other vampires in need. Pashukis are born solely to give their blood to vampires that are weak and frail. Now why is this a problem? Couldn't Karin just give them some of her blood? Well no, because it turns out that Pashukis only have a limited amount of blood. So after a couple years of giving blood, she'd eventually die. But the other vampires don't care about that. They just want her blood because they're fucking assholes. So after this, Usui, Henry, and Ren obviously decide to go after her. Carrera and Anju have to stay home though because the author is based and know that's where women belong. Apparently, the stinky vampires actually live in Usui's hometown, so he's able to guide Henry and Ren to them. Not only that, but remember earlier when Usui saw a spirit that looked like Karin? Well, that spirit is the first Pashuki, or the essence of all the past Pashukis that lived, I think? I don't know, it's kinda confusing. But anyway, she can pinpoint wherever Karin is, so that also makes Usui useful here, which is epic. So of course, Usui, Ren, and Henry head to the evil vampire sex house to go and rescue Karin. But before that happens, there's one short scene I want to quickly mention. So while Karin has been trapped inside this castle for the past couple days, she's been miserable. She's been locked up in a room ever since and only hears others talk about draining the life force out of her. It's disgusting and it makes me sick. So after a couple days, Tachibana's uncle walks by and says something that genuinely made me feel uncomfortable. He says that before Karin dies, she needs to have a child in order to continue her bloodline and pass on her Bashuki powers. He also continues by saying that he'll get one of the vampires to rape her. Not only that, but he says this without caring whatsoever. Even for a series like Karin, this is pretty damn dark. I know this doesn't happen or even comes close to happening, but just the mention of it is unsettling for me, and I usually don't get bothered by statements like this in anime, manga, or other forms of media either. So anyway, after this, Usui, Ren, and Henry come, they fight off the stinky vampires, they rescue Karin, and the day is saved. Now I was surprised that no one ended up dying in this arc. I thought for sure either Henry or Elda would die, but I guess I was wrong. It sort of feels underwhelming for Karin to be saved and have nothing be lost in the process. Now that's what I would say, but there's still one chapter left, and oh boy, it's a doozy alright. So a couple months have passed, and now everyone is happy, and everything is back to normal, or at least for the most part. Apparently Karin's blood stopped increasing, and she stopped having nosebleeds ever since she kissed Usui. That's because when they kissed, the curse of the Bashukis was broken because humans and vampires finally achieved true love. Now that doesn't make much sense. Humans and vampires have fallen in love before, and they've done so for over hundreds of years. They still do even to this day because Tachibana is even the child of a human and a vampire. You're telling me that just because a human hasn't fallen in love with a Bashuki, the curse never broke? Well, that's kinda stupid, but I guess it sorta makes sense too. So after this, a couple more months have passed, and now it's spring. And now it's also time for the best moment in the entire series. So Karin graduates high school, goes back to her house, and sees Ren in her room. He puts his hand on her head, but instead of hurting her, he instead just pats her. He tells her that just because he hits her all the time doesn't mean that he hates her. She then passes out and loses her memory of her family. Apparently 4 years were spent preparing for this day since her family had a feeling her life might end up like this. I also think it's great that Ren giving Karin a noogie, which was just a dumb joke, turned out to be an important part of the plot. So now that Karin's blood doesn't increase, she's basically just a normal human girl, which is why her family decides to let her go. She's going to grow old and die much sooner than the rest of her family. Her life with her family would be very complicated, and it's for the better if she just forgets about them. I feel like they didn't need to erase her memories, but at the same time, it probably is for the better. There are too many things to consider here, and it's such a hard scene to read through. The entire series was about family, so to see it end like this is heartbreaking. To Karin, family was everything, but I guess now she has to live and make her own family. All that while completely forgetting about her parents, grandmother, brother, and sister. But it's all not entirely for the worse because Usui proposes to her and they get married and have a kid. It's such a bittersweet and tragic ending. On one hand, Karin lost everything, but on the other, she's also extremely happy now. She's married to Usui, has a daughter, and is living a very happy life. Honestly, I'm shocked that I forgot the series ended this way. This ending is fantastic, and I'm sure it's going to stick with me for quite a while after finishing and reviewing this. Well, I think that's it for the manga, so now I can finally finish this. Oh god damn it. Okay, so there's one more thing I haven't talked about yet, which is Karin Airmail. It's a bonus volume that contains 4 extra chapters. Unfortunately, only 3 of them have been translated and dumped online, so I can't go over the last one. If you're mad, then I guess buy and send me a copy of the manga, and then I'll review it. So anyway, the first chapter is about Maki and Kikuchi. Who is Kikuchi, you may ask? Well, I have no fucking idea. Apparently, he's Maki's childhood friend or something. So Kikuchi has a crush on Usui's mother, but he's too scared to confess, so he just ends up with Maki instead because why not? This chapter is overall fine. My main problem is that Kikuchi just isn't that interesting or likable as a character. It also doesn't help that Maki isn't as developed as she was in the anime. At least there, she got time to grow feelings towards Winter and had something to do. But like I said earlier, she doesn't really do much in the manga. This chapter is basically saying, oh yeah, let's give Maki a happy ending too, because yeah. I feel like this chapter could have focused on characters we actually care about like Karin, Usui, Anju, or Ren, but whatever. Alright, on to the next chapter. So this one has Elda's grandnephew Frederick protect a nun at a church from his mother. It's interesting to find out that some of Elda's family survived in Europe, but besides that, this chapter's just alright. I wasn't a big fan of it. Definitely my least favorite of the three, but still not bad. Okay, now on to the actual final chapter of the volume and the series. So this one has Karen's daughter Karin meeting up with Ren's son Ray, and no, not that one. Basically, they just stick around and talk to each other. Nothing special. However, it is pretty satisfying to see these characters meet each other without even knowing that they're related. We also even get to see Ren and Usui for a short while too, so that's neat. Also, the last page is funny too, so that's good. But yeah, overall a solid and fun chapter, easily the best of the three. And with that, I'm giving Karen's manga a 9.58 out of 10 and Karin Airmail a 6.5 out of 10. Holy fucking shit, I'm finally done talking about Karin. I love the series, both the anime and the manga, but god damn it, this took so much longer than I thought it would. If you actually watched the entire video, then thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Well, that's it for this video. Peace out, Morpeds.
One time, I laid my cat down on her back.
Are you gonna get arrested for this?
I don't know. No.
Think about it.
I don't think so.
Okay, go ahead.
I didn't penetrate. I laid the cat down on her back, and then I moved her little chicken legs, like, you know, spread open or whatever. And I was like, if I just like hump, but like on her tummy, like that's not weird, like whatever. And then I humped it, and it kept going, and I came all over the cat.
No, you did not.
It was like my first sexual experience.